Very good morning to you once again. ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule and other leaders charged with corruption must step aside within 30 days. This comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa gave the closing address of the National Executive Committee late on Monday night. Well, joining us now to discuss this and more is Sibongile Besani. He is head of the ANC presidency. Mr. Besani, thank you very much for your time. I know that you wrote a very interesting piece around the issues that trouble the ANC, but you're going to have to bear with me on this one because your article, indeed, it does speak to exactly some of what came out last night, but the story right now is around this step-aside rule and the time frame that has now been given, which is that of 30 days for members to step aside or face suspension. Just frame for us first what the rationale was for the 30-day period.
Well, the rationale is very simple. Thanks for having me and to the viewers at home. The rationale is quite simple, probably. When you are an organization such as the ANC, every decision that you take has got to be a decision that does not only inspire confidence, but also unite the organization. So we have adopted the guidelines, and those guidelines have got to work. And it is important that when we implement and execute the guidelines, we make sure that we implement them in such a way that they grow, they unite the organization forcefully. So that is the basic rationale, that you need time, you need to ensure that the processes that are going to be undertaken are processes that would make everybody feel fair and feel accommodated.
Well, some will argue that the guidelines were adopted by the party back in February, and there has been this talk of the 7-day period. Was that actually part and parcel of the discussions, that perhaps it should be within 7 days that the people who are charged and are in front of the courts right now should step aside within 7 days, and then because of the back and forth, you end up with 30 days?
No, Paul, I think what is critical is for us to focus on the decision of the NEC, not on what actually was discussed and so on. I think it would be quite unfair to take this interview into the NEC. What is critical is the decision of the NEC, and that decision of the NEC talks about 30 days.
Okay, all right. Let's then talk about who is going to be responsible to enforce this step-aside rule, both at national and the provinces.
Look, you would remember that decisions of the ANC are executed by the structures of the organization. At the national level, you have the NEC, you have the MWC, you have officials. You also have various officials being given responsibilities. So, and you also have the guidelines that clarify on how a decision of this nature has to be executed. So there are mechanisms. There is no confusion as to who should do what. At the provincial level, the PECs are quite endowed with that kind of responsibility. So we are clear and we're confident that there's no confusion as to who does what constitutionally and also in line with the guidelines that we have adopted.
Yeah, okay. So, listening to the president yesterday, he did seem to mention specifically the office of the Secretary General at a national level that presumably will enforce this step-aside rule in relation to senior members of the party, those who sit in the NEC. For example, people like yourself, should you be found to have been in violation of the law. And then in provinces, it's the secretaries of the provinces. But it obviously brings an interesting element at a national level that the Secretary General's office, the man who leads that office, is the very person that is charged and is before the courts, which means this rule will now apply to him. Who is going to enforce this when he obviously is an implicated party?
The SG is empowered by the Constitution to execute certain tasks, even on matters of discipline. The Secretary General of the ANC has powers to ensure that certain tasks are performed. And the Constitution of the ANC also allows for, there's a Deputy Secretary General, there are officials. The Constitution allows for, in a case where there is sort of an area of conflict, other officials will be able actually to execute that task. So the ANC works in such a way that wherever people are conflicted, there's always mechanisms to ensure that those who are conflicted can be able to be dealt with by other structures and other officials. So even in that regard, the officials are dealing with the matter, any other matter where people are conflicted, especially at their level.
Yeah. All right. So it means then in this instance, Jesse Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General, may be the one that bears the responsibility to tell the SG to please step aside once the 30 days has come.
Look, it may be that way. The officials may find a way of dealing with that. They have the responsibility to ensure that they delegate tasks to one another. It is not a matter that was ventilated in the meeting, but it shouldn't be an issue. The officials are capable of dealing with an area that has to be clarified, or an area that is conflictual in nature.
Yeah.
What is critical is that any decision of the ANC has structures to implement it, and where people are conflicted, the officials or the structures have the capability to delegate any one of them and so on.
Yeah.
That should be the issue.
The President, during his speech last night, Mr. Besani, he made special mention of the Secretary General. And I want to touch on his words a little bit, where he says the NEC welcomed the decision by the Secretary General to use this time to seek counsel of past leaders. What was the background to this?
Look, Paul, what you must understand, there is nothing to celebrate when a leader of the ANC is faced with this kind of charges. And therefore, even the ANC itself is not having it easy. And because the Secretary General is a very critical person in the unity and renewal of the ANC, it's important that a decision of this nature, when it's taken, when it is implemented, it has to be alive and sensitive to that particular reality, because the Secretary General of the ANC is quite a very, very important person in the movement. So the NEC dealt with the matter with the sensitivity it deserves, with the focus on the unity and renewal of the organization. So when reference to the SG in what the President said is to ascertain the members of the ANC that this is not a decision aimed at being vindictive, but it is a decision that is predicated on uniting the movement, on ensuring that the movement stay calm in situations that, in moments that are very challenging to it.
Yeah.
So that is the essence of that statement.
So in essence, the Secretary General was asked to step aside. Is that what you're telling us?
No. This is not a decision about the Secretary General per se. The decision was about the step aside. That is why if you look at the decision on the statement of the ANC, for instance, you will realize that everyone who has been everyone who is accused or who has been indicted has been requested, has been given this kind of a period. So the NEC doesn't work that way, that SG do this and no. It is a decision of the NEC. But the reality is we know that the SG is also has been indicted. So in that context, that is why the NEC embraced the decision in that manner, to speak to the reality, but broadly, it is a decision that has to do with, not with a particular specific person. It is directed in line with the conference resolution that anyone who is being indicted and in the courts of law has got to act has got to step aside. So Indeed. It's not a decision, yeah.
And quite fairly so, let's not focus the attention on the SG, although he is a very senior member of the party. We know that there are other people who occupy senior positions in the ANC. Denim Caesar, for example, the treasurer in Limpopo, he's before courts. Bongani Bongo, who is a member of parliament, he's before courts. There is Mike Mabuyakulu in KZN. Is there a firm date for these people to step aside? You said 30 days. When does the 30-day start?
Well, you should know better. From Presidency, we pronounce on policy-related matter, and the step-aside policy or decision in this regard, its implementation is 30 days. And I suppose that 30 days is 30 days from now. And it should be understood in that way. So we didn't go around to ask for names. The SGO is the one that deals with processing of decisions and so on. So they'll be able to process it. They'll be able to communicate to whoever is affected or compile relevant information and so on. But the standpoint it was to communicate the NEC decision, and that has been communicated on accordingly.
All right. The step-aside rule, Mr. Besani, it has far-reaching implications now that it is being operationalized. And I'd like for you to keep in mind people that may potentially be charged criminally at the end of the Zondo Commission. Is the party concerned that by the time this step-aside rule has effectively been implemented in the party, you may have a significant number of members who actually have got to vacate their positions of responsibility?
The ANC has always been concerned about corruption, has always been concerned about a number of misdemeanors and so on. That is why we have a diagnostic report, so we've always been concerned. And we also took resolutions at the conference in relation to demonstrate our concern. But our resolution were to be put into action, and hence they led to the Judicial Commission of Inquiry. So, and we fully understand the implication of the possible implication of some of these judgments or possibilities. We fully understand them. So we've always been concerned about it.
Yeah.
But we want to believe that as the leader of society, we have taken a view that we need to introspect and we need to act accordingly. So we've always been concerned, but we don't want to preempt the process.
Yeah.
We want to act fairly, with sincerity, with honesty to the South Africans. So that is why the commission has done its best to ensure that everybody who's been accused of this or that is actually given an opportunity to come forward. So we've always been concerned, And we understand that if we are to cleanse ourselves of many misdemeanors, it also comes with pain.
Mm. Final question to you, Mr. Besani. The example of Marius Fransman, who was charged with rape and later acquitted by a court. There's always the argument that this step-aside rule might prejudice people who will possibly later be cleared by the court. But some have said, look at his political career today. Where is he? He's nowhere. Is there merit to that argument?
Yes, there is merit to that argument. You remember, even before we had these guidelines, we had a VBS matter for 2 years. Comrade Denim Caesar and rationale where they stepped aside, and for 2 years they had not been taken to court and nothing had happened. And 2 years later, the NEC had to say, but nothing has happened and these people have stepped aside. So we had to review that particular decision. So last year. Now, there is merit, I must accept, but if you look at the guidelines, I may not be more specific. I think they give a time period that if, for instance, you have been indicted and nothing has happened to your case, you are given a period where you can come back to the NEC and that decision may have to be reviewed.
Yeah.
So that caters for that particular concern. And we have seen many cases where you are arrested, but you are never indicted, or the case drags on and on and on. That particular matter, there is a cure, there is a remedy in our guidelines for such an instance.
All right. And yeah, I suppose this is where we leave it. But you are faced with a potential disaster in your hands as the leadership of the ANC. What happens to those who are going to mobilize around Ace Magashule to say he's our SG, he's not going to go anywhere?
Look, we believe that members of the ANC rightfully they can feel aggrieved when an SG of the ANC undergoes this kind of experience. But what is critical is that the discipline of our movement has got to take precedence, because when the highest decision-making body in between conference has taken a decision and has explained it in a manner that the president explained yesterday, revolutionary discipline requires that all of us have got to abide by that decision. So we want to believe that the statement and the closing remarks of the president yesterday cleared any possible confusion that may have been there. So we are confident that our members will not act in a manner that perpetuates or deepens divisions and factions. That is why the NEC came out very clear against any form of a faction, be it RET, whatever, be it RET and any other organization. The NEC was very strong that it is high time that all these factions have got to end abruptly. All of us have got to abide by the discipline of the ANC. Otherwise, once we find ourselves on the other side of the discipline of the ANC, action will definitely be taken against anyone who continues to act in a factional manner. So it is not expected of any member of the ANC to mobilize in a manner that undermines the ANC, that undermines the decisions of our movement. It is not expected at all.
Sibongile Besani, thank you very much for your time. He's ANC head of the presidency. Thanks indeed. Well, let's take a breather. When we return, we'll give you the markets update. This is Newsfeed, the AM edition.